The title of this talk is Challenges, Urban Adaptation and Change from Social Justice and Ecological Resilience Perspectives. It's a great honor to be here today. I would like to thank the Barcelona metropolitan area, Eugenia especially, for inviting me to be part of LIFE Urban Greening Plan project. And I join you in celebrating the launch of the Metropolitan Master Plan. I share the goals in designing innovative mechanisms to plan, implement, strengthen, and organizing green infrastructures in peri-urban areas. I would like to thank the Barcelona metropolitan area for your interest in the book I co-edited with ecologists Stuart Pickett and Mary Cadenasso, Resilience in Ecology and Urban Design. We see the city as a heterogeneous, interconnected, extensive system. And for a long time, we have worked collaboratively to overcome the center-periphery dichotomy between natural and urban settings as part of the Baltimore Ecosystem Study, one of the first long-term ecological studies in urban areas in the US. Like you, we search for new urban design models that respond to current and future social justice and environmental concerns. However, this book is 10 years old, and it was based on a conference we had back in 2007. So I'd like to update the themes of this book, drawing from some recent projects and publications. First, I'd like to talk about my contribution to this book called Multi-Systemic Resilience, Adaptation and Transformation in Contexts of Change. My book chapter is titled The Embodied Multi-Systemic Resilience of Architecture and Built Form. The book sets out a radically interdisciplinary and international research agenda connecting the concepts of resilience as employed in psychology as well as in biology and ecology. While the built environment is positioned in this chart at kind of a large scale between the natural and the social environment, for me, in the chapter, I argue that architecture and landscape embody multi-scalar as well as multi-systemic resilience in themselves. I developed this concept of multi-systemic resilience and embodied multi-systemic resilience with my colleague Jean Gardner, professor of social ecological history and theory at Parsons School of Design, in this book from 2007, Cinemetrics. Cinemetrics imagines architecture and landscape design as embodying multi-systemic resilience through the human sensory-motor system. Our sensorial apparatus connects our cerebral spinal system, which activates our locomotor muscles. Our actions have consequences, and we reflect on our acts and consequences and relate them to larger environmental impacts. This sensory-motor system is schematized by philosopher Gilles Deleuze in his analysis of cinema into attentive circuits of perception, affection, impulse, action, reflection, and relation. Our interests are in historical conceptualizations of the human body organism as an information feedback system in these times of social conflict and climate risk. Deleuze identifies moments of sensory-motor breakdown, and for my Italian friends in the audience, Roberto Rossellini in the film Germany Year Zero shows the sense of not knowing where you are, not knowing how to act in the ruins of post-war European cities. Characters are depicting inhabiting a new world where sensations and feelings are new and we don't know how to act. At the same time, Italian architect Saverio Muratori identified the sensory-motor breakdown in post-war Europe as a crisis that interrupted the organic continuity of city-building traditions and consequently social natural relations. His studies on an operative history scale from the adaptation of individual rooms and buildings in Venice to regional and continental territories shaped by ancient civilizations. His notion of an operative history is embodied in the social ecological act of world-making. Muratori metaphorically conceives of the city territory, neighborhoods, and buildings as cellular organisms, tissues that humans adopt and change over time in response to opportunity, disturbance, and crisis. In this diagram, Giancarlo Cataldi depicts Muratori's ideas of a feedback loop between the reality of constructing and dwelling in built form with mentally reading and projecting new construction. The problem today, of course, is the planetary scale of human social ecological disturbance, which necessitates linking architectural with ecological thinking. Muratori's death in 1973 coincided with the landmark publication of Resilience and Stability of Ecological Systems by Buzz Halling, who with Lance Gunderson modeled a similar feedback circuit of exploitation, conservation, release, and reorganization in natural systems. Gunderson and Halling developed a panarchy model to measure resilience within nested adaptive space and time cycles ranging from the pine needle to the tree crown, forest patch to stand, to the entire forest biome and regional landscape. In this diagram, I relate the nested scales of the panarchy model to operative urban histories of neighborhoods, cities, and territories. Embodying multi-systemic resilience can be conceived as positioning the human sensory motor system within operative histories of architecture and built form and the nested scales of nature's adaptive cycles. This diagram integrates this continuity of thought between the disciplines of architecture and ecology to develop practices for embodying multi-systemic resilient processes at different nested scales and temporal scales. In the Multi-Systemic Resilience book chapter, I argue for an operative panarchy, where we integrate the feedback loops between human building and non-human natural systems. I hope it is a useful model for the Barcelona metropolitan area implements its master plan in multiple phases at various scales in relationship to citizen feedback, as well as confronting a new geological age, the Anthropocene, marked by critical breakdowns in sensory motor, social, and ecological systems. A little bit of personal history. I felt like in an Italian neorealist film when I moved to the East Village of New York in 1980, amidst pervasive abandonment, vacancy, and fire, but also guerrilla gardening, homesteading, squatting, and a legendary art performance and cultural scene. In the spirit of Muratori, my first publication from 1994, Transparent Cities, recognized the architecture of the city as constantly shifting social ecological assemblages in parallel with an ecological understanding of resilience. Transparent Cities sees cities and territories as politically contested ground, constantly in flux. Transparency is a goal of democratic governance, but also a phenomenological optical quality. As in Cubist painting, it implies a broader spatial order through a simultaneous perception of different spatial locations. This is key in urban design, where different perceptions of the city, say architectural and ecological ones, can be reconciled in 3 dimensions. My East Village neighborhood at the time was later identified by geographer Neil Smith as a new urban frontier of disinvestment, gentrification, and revanchism. Coincidentally, at the same time, journalist Joel Giraud identified exurban sprawl as the new urban frontier. Looking at these 2 frontiers side by side, we can see on the left a map of community gardens in my neighborhood in the East Village, ground zero of gentrification. And on the right, we see the remnant native forest in abandoned agricultural fields near Giroux, sprawling central New Jersey edge city, about 1 hour south of New York City. These two frontiers also apply to the two disciplines of architecture and ecology. The same year I moved to the East Village, again on the left. Ecologist Stuart Pickett began his career at Rutgers University in central New Jersey and the ex-urban frontier, where he taught and directed the Buell Small Succession Study until 2002. Located at the Hutchinson Memorial Forest on the right in Somerset County, New Jersey, the succession study consists of a 26-hectare old-growth forest acquired from local Lenape tribe in 1701. The forest was continuously maintained and surrounding fields farmed until the land was sold in 1950. The Buell Small Succession Study has tracked the change in plant communities undergone successional transformation from released agricultural fields. Remember, it's surrounded by these former agricultural fields, since 1958. It is a story of the historical force of plants in what is now a young forest. We can see these. We can see these two. On the left is Community Garden, the East Village, and on the right, a view within the Hutchinson Forest, and come to grips with the new idea of urban nature through these two images. Rather than seeing natural succession as discrete changes, culminating in regional climax, Pickett formulates a dynamic view of landscapes as heterogeneous mixes of successional habitats generated by random or periodic disturbance. Disturbance processes, described by Pickett as patch dynamics, produce spatial heterogeneity in both urban frontiers. Heterogeneous patch structure is a basic characteristic of urban nature. Different patches support different arrays of selection pressure in which populations, human as well as non-human, respond. Contemporary succession theory recognizes that pattern of species assemble and sort in complex, nonlinear ways in time and space. Patch dynamics can inform how we design incrementally and with feedback loops. In order to visualize the landscape dynamics of a region, Pickett constructed this three-dimensional model. The X and Y axis represent a literal map of the area to be considered, while the Z axis can then represent an index of successional advancement. The highs present late succession communities and the lows present earlier ones. Patches of different successional environments are continually changing size, position, and geographic relationships depending on disturbance regime. This presents a complex, dynamic pattern of selection pressure in the landscape that allows for the assortment of species into different successional positions. I hope you're still with me. Manhattan time formations. In my project, Manhattan Time Formations, I developed digital models that use the same Z-axis idea of time as Pickett, modeling the successional development of cycles of capitalism as seen in high-rise office buildings in Midtown Manhattan. Pickett and I were destined to work together and to integrate natural and built succession and the architecture and ecology of the city and the Baltimore Ecosystem Study starting in 2002. Patch Atlas. I'm halfway done. Patch Atlas, integrating design practices and ecological knowledge for cities as complex systems. The Patch Atlas, co-authored with plant ecologists Pickett and Mary Cadanasso and landscape architect Victoria Marshall. Here, urban landscapes are seen as spatial arrays, resolvable as patches that can exist at any scale. Spatial heterogeneity is expressed by a variety of patches. Through a patch atlas, we must also consider the processes that create and connect these patches. Disturbance events, both natural and by design, alter the mixture of patches as well as the kinds of connections among them. Spatial heterogeneity here is measured in terms of land cover, not land use. Baltimore is a disturbed landscape marked by structural racism, disinvestment, and suburbanization. The Baltimore Ecosystem Study provides an inclusive environment that respects and embraces a culture of collaboration and flexibility so that all individuals are able to participate and contribute to their full potential, resulting in work that is informed by and informs participants and stakeholders in the long-term ecological research project. It's time for a fuller definition of ecology. What is ecology? In addition to the scientific study of the processes influencing the distribution and abundance of organisms that we see in the Patch Atlas, ecological science also measures the interactions between organisms and their environment and the transformation and flux of information, energy, and matter. On the left is the classic mechanistic ecosystem model developed by Eugene Odom to measure ecosystem inputs and outputs and the ecological processes and interactions that transform energy, matter, and information. And of course, I learned in Brussels, thank you, Rosalind and the team, about Brussels was one of the first cities to do an ecosystem model of the whole city. On the right, land cover alterations through tree harvesting or natural disturbance are measured at the Hubbard Brook Experimental Forest up in New Hampshire, just north of Boston. Here, water chemistry and temperature are measured in small watersheds. See the very fine-grained small watersheds at the top of the map, and the data is evaluated to understand the larger forest ecosystem. This is the experimental forest where Midwestern U.S. coal-burning plants were discovered to produce the acid rainfall in the northeastern cities. And it's where they're measuring climate change today. Again, like in the Buell Small long-term studies, they've been doing this for over 50, 60 years. Hubbard Brook is the ecosystem model for the design work we do as part of the Baltimore Ecosystem Study, where design changes in the watersheds are measured to reduce non-point nitrogen pollution into the Chesapeake Bay. Like in the Panarchy model, a nested, hierarchical, small watershed and patch approach is required to evaluate ecosystem processes, interactions, and transformations. Systems do not persist in the face of change by simply resisting disturbance at a given level. Rather, many systems respond to the creation of disturbed patches through altered fluxes of material, energy, and species. Indeed, many species take advantage of the disturbance for the changes that follow such disturbances. The Patch Atlas covers 170 square kilometers of the Baltimore-Gwensfills watershed, which crosses political, racial, and class boundaries, as well as the political boundary between Baltimore City and Baltimore County. In the maps, we can see both concentrations of forests in the city center, as well as dense building fabric at the periphery. The key to the atlas is this combinatory table, here composed of all the possible land cover families that are composed of different combinations of land covers in our patch mapping system. Each patch family, you see clusters of families by color, infrared color, is a combination of different land covers derived from aerial infrared data. Woody and herbaceous vegetation, bare soil, pavement, and buildings are the land covers we measure. The land cover families in this combinatory table are arranged as a matrix along two gradients. From the left to the right, the families move from forest to building dominated, and vertically from homogeneous, 100% of one type on the top, to the most heterogeneous at the one at the bottom is 20% of the 5 different land covers. The key to this atlas, is this combinatory table. 2 gradients. Back to this, sorry. The numbers indicate the percentage of a land cover in each swatch. So one of these we call a swatch, like when you choose a paint color. 4 means that one type of land cover dominates the patch and is present at greater than 75% of the patch. So it's dominated, the upper left, by forest. 3 means that 2 types of land cover can be over 50% of the patch and are co-present in between 30 and 50%, but you see a kind of gap in the 3 number between what I call 1-parent and 2-parent families, because below 50% you can have 2 land covers that share less than 50% of a patch. 2 is for land covers that are less than 35% and 1 less than 10%, allowing for greater heterogeneity with the patch. I know you all understand that perfectly now, so I'll keep on moving. On the left of the image is the combinatory table showing the possible patches that can exist, and on the right is the patches that actually occur in the Gwens Falls watershed. So you can see there's a great amount of forest. It's a wet environment, very forested on the upper left, and you can see where the building and pavement start to dominate in the more middle range, and the rarity of real heterogeneous patches. The graph is a signature of patches that are actually present. And going forward, we aim to create comparable patch signatures at different time periods. Remember Pickett's time analysis, so we can see how succession is altering all these patches over time. But also different cities in the world. For instance, our co-city is Phoenix, Arizona, so there's a much more dominance of bare soil, like Barcelona, like drier climates. So depending on the biome, you'll have a greater presence of a different land cover. Here we see 4 examples of patched land cover families. For example, on the left, a new housing subdivision and a former farm is an example of a herbaceous vegetation-dominated family. That's America, cul-de-sacs, we still build them. Below left is a pavement-dominated shopping mall site. Welcome to America. Top right, a commercial industrial strip as an example of a 2-family co-dominated by building and paved surfaces. And below right, you can see many residential areas are in woody vegetation and forests and woody vegetation. So it's co-dominated by woody vegetation buildings. So nature is just in parks, it's everywhere in the city, in other words. So we read the whole watershed through these families. So we can read both architectural and ecological patterns within the larger urban watershed by mapping the location of each land cover family. Forests dominate hilltops in the upper watershed to the north, but also the metropolitan park system you see follows the stream corridors in the lower half of the watershed. And herbaceous vegetation is present in farms, but also in the lower diagram, but also golf courses, cemeteries, anywhere where there are managed grass areas in parks and suburbs. On the upper right, you can see high-density buildings are present both in the city center and along major highways outside the historical core. Commercial strips comprise a co-dominant pavement and building patch family, as we mentioned, along a strip that follows the whole northwest to southeast flow of the watershed. The atlas maps overlapping world-making activities of non-human as well as human agents. I think I have 5 minutes. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, finally, just the last case study. for you, and I'm very excited. There's agronomists in the audience, and this is about recognizing farmland as parks. And this is part of a new book coming out this year by my university's Urban Systems Lab called Nature-Based Solutions for Cities. I don't believe nature alone is a solution to human systems, and so I called my chapter Urban Designs as Social Natural Resolutions rather than nature-based solutions. But I completely support the rhetoric of nature-based solutions. I think it was articulated very well in the video introduction. For me, nature is not a solution, but urban designs are a way to resolve this kind of conflict, potential conflict between society and nature. I use a case study here to suggest a more integrative notion of architecture and ecology as an array of fine-scale, practical design work towards resolving the challenges inherent between socially and naturally occurring processes. The long-term case study is in 4 urbanizing villages outside of Chiang Mai, Thailand. An ancient, until recently, small and remote city territory, Chiang Mai is currently witnessing rapid urbanization and development. Anybody go to ride the elephants in the mountains in Chiang Mai? I highly recommend it. Mid-20th century modern road-based planning models are being implemented, and they ignore the architectural and landscape matrix of indigenous, village-based, social, natural, and hydrological systems. Like in yet another neorealist film, many rural people, like one of our informants in one of the villages, are responding to the sensory motor breakdowns of urbanization. The heart of these urbanizing rice farm villages are extended family compound houses, where owners are facing the demands of participating in an urban economy. The word ecology comes from the Greek oikos, meaning household, which aligns with Alberti's notion that the city is a large house, and a house in turn is like a small city. The villages we studied are like jigsaw puzzles composed of interlocking compound houses under the shade of fruit trees in close proximity to rice paddies. The architecture and ecology of the Chiang Mai compound house are each transforming to absorb guest workers, new businesses, commuting into the city for school and work, as well as continuing farming. The villages survive through wet rice cultivation fed by a centuries-old community weir and canal irrigation system. Here, some of our student researchers are taught by one of the villagers how to measure one of the weirs using a bamboo rod. We measured 4 weirs in the distributed canals to the rice paddies. And so in a dry climate, this is a monsoon climate, rains for half the year, it's dry half the year, so there's incredible indigenous knowledge about retaining water. The weirs are key sites for also understanding the ecological transformation of urbanization, as in Baltimore and Hubbard Brook experimental forests. You can see the pattern here. 4 villages share the common irrigation system inside the new Outer Ring Highway. You can see the Outer Ring Highway on your right, and then the red line is the sort of connecting road between the yellow are the rice fields and the green are the forested patches. Farmers build new houses with profits from selling small farm parcels for housing developments, while much land is quickly overgrown when left abandoned from failed or speculative projects from previous eras. Looking at the historical development patterns of the study area, on the left you can see the area before development. In the middle image you can see traces of an earlier development before the financial crisis of 1997, which resulted in abandoned and overgrown land. And on the right we can see the newer gated communities springing up along the newly completed Outer Ring Highway. Zooming out to the greater Chiang Mai comprehensive planning, they have a plan, but they have no implementation of the plan, other than highway construction. During the same 3 time periods, you can see in the middle the radial pattern of a North American hub and spoke planning model where the city starts to grow around these radiating highways. And then more recently, the diffused pattern of gated residential communities following the construction of the ring roads and not enforcing the comprehensive plan of preserving agricultural land. I contend that traditional road-based land use centralized planning model was inappropriate for managing the city's explosive growth, and a high ecological resolution land cover survey, such as the Patch Atlas, would be the basis of a more successful urban-rural hybrid planning, and the rice fields can be seen as a large productive park. While the historical city of Chiang Mai is located near the west bank of the Ping River on the left, our study area forms a diffuse urban pattern, and again, yellow is rice fields within the Quang River watershed to the east. Consisting primarily of wet rice farmland and a string of densely populated village, black dots, I don't know if you can see it, there's villages everywhere. They indicate Buddhist temples, which were from a 1950 US aerial survey. And so already in 1950, this land is farmed and urbanized in this diffuse way. The urbanizing Quang River watershed constitutes a diffuse city which is ignored due to center-periphery mindsets. I'm missing my last slide. Uh-oh. Anyway, so I'll just talk over this last image, but it's a beautiful diagram of all the disciplines, how they merge together. I'll have to recover it and get it. So basically it has architecture beginning with Alberti on the bottom, and ecology beginning with some of these landmark ecologists on the top, and then how Pickett and I in the Baltimore system are sort of creating this field in between. And so we invented landscape architecture, landscape ecology, all these fields to sort of, in order to talk each other, because architects and ecologists have nothing in common to talk about. It's like they're yin and yang. So I think, I've been really trying to understand this discursive field. And so in recent decades, in order for the old discipline of architecture to converse with the new science of ecology, an expanded discursive array of boundary fields such as environmental design, urban ecology, landscape ecology, emerged as the middle ground, conveying towards an integrated engagement with the climate crisis and social inclusion. A key link between the disciplines of architecture and ecology is their finely grained, embodied practices. Back to the beginning of the lecture. Ecological fieldwork, ground truthing, like architecture, is three-dimensional, material, and immersive. I am also part of the North American Urban Sustainability Network that has developed a transformative model that merges architecture and ecology into inclusive, creative, knowledge-to-action design processes. We endeavor towards mutual learning between architecture and ecology, with particular attention to adaptive processes, inclusion, and pluralistic governance. This merging of design and ecology will advance urban sustainability most quickly when a nexus of feedback is purposely created to promote adaptive change and risk mitigation in both urban neighborhoods and regions. Paying attention to the well-being of populations that have been historically overburdened by environmental hazards and excluded from policy and planning decisions is also crucial in the design of sustainable and equitable cities and regions. A transformative urban design process must incorporate justice and equity, and strategies for doing so should be informed by social spatial analysis of patterns of settlement, displacement, and segregation of vulnerable populations, and the policy and planning procedures that shape these things historically. Governance of urban ecological processes has shifted in recent decades from hierarchical to polycentric structures. These governance groups include organizations that work to conserve, manage, monitor, advocate for, and educate about a range of quality of life issues regarding urban resources. Finally, a transformative and inclusive urban design ecology nexus is future-oriented and anticipatory. I look forward to joining you in the field. Thank you.